You tuned a risky business. I'm your host, Bryan Hattingh, with you once again. I'm going to move straight forward to introducing my most esteemed and very cherished guest in the form of Les Rance, who we've known each other for close to 25 years, I think now.
Yeah,
and he's welcome, Leslie. Thank you for coming to the show.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bryan. Wonderful to see you again and good to have the opportunity to chat.
And you are, and have been for some time, you resident in the United Kingdom.
Yes, yeah, out here in Scotland, in beautiful Boney, Scotland. Lovely place.
Oh, were you always in Scotland when you were over there? Were you not? You weren't down in London or in England itself?
Been in and out of England for over 10 years. This time Scotland for 8 years now.
And that was, if I remember correctly, was initiated because your lovely lady Dudu was completing her PhD in Scotland.
Yeah, precisely. And she has. And so really excited about her accomplishments. And, you know, for a long while, Bryan, she was happy to go around the world wherever work took me. In this particular instance, it was, as you say, because of her. And I'm delighted to have been able to press into something that she wanted to do, and she's having a whale of a time having done it.
And do people call her Dr. Dudu?
No, they don't, and she doesn't insist on it. She hardly calls herself that either.
Yeah, no, but I think it's just got such a nice ring to it, Dr. Dudu. I love it.
I love it too.
I'm definitely going to call her that when I see her.
Oh, please do, because she works so hard to accomplish it, and here at the end of it all, she doesn't really ask people to call her that, but she's quite modest.
Just while we're still talking about her, what did she do her thesis on?
Yeah, she focused on entrepreneurship, and she looked at specifically mentorship, and there's a book coming out on it fairly shortly. But what it was really was the focus on the mentor's experience. I think there's a lot that's been said about the mentee's experience and what they get out of mentorship. But there's been this assumption that, you know, mentors perhaps don't learn as much through the cycle, that they don't go through feelings of inadequacy, and how do they bridge contextual knowledge? And she would say this much more eloquently than I would be able to do so, but that's largely what she's focused on. And interestingly, Bryan, all of her research data was gathered in South Africa. So the context is South Africa, but it's broadly applicable. But I think there's going to be a really fantastic book coming out that's going to be practical and valuable for organizations, but particularly for mentors to look and see that there's a lot more value in what they do than the generosity that they give in being mentors.
Well, I'm super excited about that because, and it's so funny because it actually bleeds into our bigger discussion this afternoon around yourself and your journey. And because if I look at the world of mentoring and coaching, and you know this all too well, they're two very different disciplines. So whilst there's overlap and there's interface, and there are two different disciplines. And I think on the one hand, coaching is now quite an evolved discipline and has structures and processes and things that are wrapped around it, and the training programs are there and the certifications and accreditations that exist. Whereas in the world of mentoring, I don't know if much exists around formal training of mentors and equipping of them, because most of the time these are mature, experienced people who, have arrived and, are going to do some mentoring. And that some mentoring could be so vastly different from person to person and organization to organization. And there's no real metric or framework of measurement, or how do you know if this is working or not working? So I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that, and I'm sure through your discussions with Dudu, what are your observations? And you yourself have played the role of mentor in many instances. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you've hit a very important point, Bryan. There aren't any sort of global certifications that are commonly known if at all, in that particular area. So, whilst organizations, and I worked for two fantastic organizations, the latter that really lent into formal mentorship, whilst they come up with their own guidelines and processes around mentorship, there aren't internationally established frameworks. Now, why is that important? I think it's important because we're dealing with people, and there's got to be, I think, ethical guidelines and certifications and things that people are duty bound to uphold. Generally, I think people speak well of the mentors that they have had, but I don't think that it's always a given that a mentor-mentee relationship is a pleasant one. So I think there needs to be some safeguards. There needs to be some clear frameworks and direction on that. And I think that's an opportunity. I firmly believe that's an opportunity. Dudu sees that, and part of what she did in her thesis was actually to establish some frameworks, but that was largely around knowledge gaps and how you deal with knowledge gaps. But to your point, I think there's a need and there's an opportunity there.
Because if I think about it, and you know this all too well, and you yourself are a practicing coach in one of the many sort of hats that you wear, and what one really wants to look at, and even coaching itself for many years was not truly fully understood, and in many instances still isn't, and I think that there are very different approaches to it, and for us. As you know, we've been involved in coaching now for 25 years and formally, and our choice right up front of the modality and methodology was one that was transformational, that would affect accelerated or even revolutionary sustainable behavioral change. Because as you would know, if you don't change behaviors, how can you expect results to be any different? And changing behaviors doesn't come easy. And it's all too often. Coaches get caught up in a situation of telling people stuff where that's clearly not the role at all. It's about asking the right questions that are going to cause an aha revelational, wow, I see the world differently. I see myself differently. I need to do this differently because it's been linked to highest levels of meaning and purpose. And it's that gets the person to be willing to confront their fears, overcome their self-limiting beliefs, do the tough stuff to create that shift. Information on its own has never changed behavior. And so even, intellectual acknowledgement of a truth, as rich as that is, doesn't mean you're going to do anything about it. You and I can know the 7 habits of Covey inside out, but doesn't mean we're going to apply any one of them. What's it going to take us to bring that into our space? And so for me, that's where it's such an interesting, one could talk about it for hours, the whole thing of what really is at the heart of mentoring, and what is it that's going to stick, and how do you get it to stick? That I think becomes the challenge.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And look, I think, what's different about mentorship and coaching is what the mentor brings is really their experience. And that experience is different from individual to individual.
Yes.
But I guess the process of how you bring that in a way to absolutely, if not guarantee, at least assure that there will be value, and that the way in which that is done is both respectful, upholding, developing, affirming. I think that's where a lot of those gaps are. Yeah. I think, it's all of the infrastructure around the mentor's actual experience and how this is delivered. Because as you say, with coaching, there have been a lot of people who say, I'm a coach, just having left business, never done a day of coaching work. And then they say, I'll coach you. But then they go into these coaching sessions and are telling people what to do. Yeah. That's where coaching is different, is there's coaching language and there's coaching processes. But with mentorship, I think there's the mentor experience, but there isn't all of the other infrastructure around on how do you deliver that experience in a consistent, value-adding, ethical, affirming way.
Now, we've kept the listeners in suspense for a whole long time now in not telling them anything about you. so, so,
Right.
so I think, like, let's look at that. I mean, you've actually got a wonderfully illustrious background, and it's been so diverse and yet so wonderfully symbiotic and synergistic. And you've worked in as an executive in general management, corporate strategy and planning, information technology. I mean, you were CIO of British America Tobacco in South Africa, public affairs, human resources. Wow, and working across industries from mining to tobacco to others. You've seen a lot out there, and you've gone through those changes, and you've moved around geographically. So it's not like where you've had to bring into that and integrate into it the cultural nuances and the sort of diversity nuances that came with it. And talk a little bit about your journey. Where did it begin, and how did it go? It's like,
Oh yeah. I count myself one of those incredibly fortunate people, Bryan. Life has been wonderfully colorful, but I'm also, born in an age and in a generation where we've all seen a lot of change, phenomenal change. So I remember as a small boy herding cattle and stripping bark from a tree and soaking it in salted water to make whips to keep the cattle in line and make sure we got them back into the kraal in time, plowing fields of land, during our school holidays, to make sure that the family had stuff. And then, into the townships in Zimbabwe, and then into the suburbs after independence, and, into really decent schools, because fortunately my parents could afford it. So that in and of itself already, for me,
wow.
was a wonderful tapestry of experiences, and then I got into the corporate world. But before I got into the corporate world, the one thing that I think positioned me for all of the rest of the color that comes after was my introduction to information technology. When the first computer started coming out, there was a guy from the UK who brought a ZX Spectrum, and he started a computer club.
Okay.
And I don't know why, but I decided to join that computer club, and I was fascinated by the programs that we were able to build. I mean, there was nothing, earth-shattering, but it just opened up a world of curiosity for me. And so I ended up studying information technology. And when I went into my first major corporate job, which was with Anglo American, a lot of the time when I worked with the different business areas, helping them with IT solutions, it gave me the opportunity to see into those different business processes, into those different business facets. And I started to realize that a lot of it just wasn't that complex. And in fact, when people explained things to you, you actually could help them. And in my case, I helped them through technology. And that started to say to me that exposure was the most important thing in learning, that most things in life are not that difficult. What is difficult is getting the opportunity to be exposed to those things. And I started making early noises in Anglo American and asking them if they would ever see me differently, if they would ever see me other than just an information technology guy, because I wanted to see different parts of their business. And they were open to it, and to the extent that they could, they gave me opportunities to see different parts of their business. So I moved out of Zimbabwe into South Africa, into the UK, but always with an IT lens, because I guess you have to add value to these organizations with what you are really good at. And what I was really good at was information technology. But when I moved across to British American Tobacco, they then were a lot bolder. It's a different industry, fast moving, and they were much more open to the idea that you could totally unshackle yourself from whence you've come and go into something totally different. And so I left information technology for a while. I went onto the corporate strategy desk. I bounced back into information technology and some of the other roles that you were talking about. And, you know, why did I do this, Bryan? It was because I'm driven by learning different things. And I'm never comfortable in just sitting in what I know. And it could have been easier for me to just perhaps have stayed in an IT career and gone all the way. And that's for some, and I don't knock that at all. But I think I just had this curiosity of, well, what's happening next door? You know, how about I go and play over there? And so geographically, that curiosity allowed me and my family to move, but also functionally, that allowed me in companies that were open to it, allowed me to move and do different things. And I learned a hell of a lot. I learned a hell of a lot about business, but I also learned about myself. You know, what I liked, what I didn't like, my limitations. And I'm the first one to tell you, Bryan, if people offer me things that I know are well outside of my capability, I'm not shy to be challenged, but I'm also not shy to say, that's great, but that's not really for me. And so me and my family's experience has just been experimental. And I think the world is such a big world. There's so much to be learned from each other, learned from different places. And so if I go back to the story of that little boy and to where I am now, it's all just been a learning journey. And it's had its ups and it had its downs, but it's all been fantastic learning.
So, and as I listen to you, what really comes to mind, which is such an important thing for people to think about and embrace, is that, you know, as we go through, and particularly going through the experience that you've spoken of, where you make these migrations into new territories and uncharted territories, is that you continually develop new competencies, you know, outside of the technical capabilities that may or may not have come with that, you know, and those competencies, many of them are unconscious competencies that you've acquired as a consequence of what you've done rather than a focus of what you've done.
Sure.
And often they're even more transportable than some of the conscious competencies. And, you know, it's like you start developing what in some instances might be described as a very acute intuition, but it's part of it is actually cognitive. It's recognizing information patterns and being able to see things differently and to step up and step back and have a broader view on things. And in that, being able to introduce new ideas and new perspectives. And it's about an increased capacity over and above capability or competency, but capacity to impact and influence and add value and to contribute. And the more that you're able to find that in a seamless way and in a synergistic way of flow, that it's not just haphazard and from here to there and everything. Not that can't be fun and work at times, but I think where there's a movement and flow towards this higher learning, this higher ability to contribute, that it's wonderfully exciting, and it brings with it that element of challenge and stretch, so that you don't get comfortable in a space. Because once you've gotten comfortable, it probably means you're not learning anything new. You know?
Well, that's true. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about mentorship and coaching.
Yeah.
I guess when I reflect now, part of what's exciting and I guess helped me through all of those changes is ask more questions, suspend assumptions, ask more questions, suspend assumptions, and just be open. And I think the coaching posture is exactly that. There's no room for assumptions with coaching. That's something different. It's more questions. And I think, you know, as leaders embrace this coaching approach to how they tackle the world, which is incredibly complex, I think the more that you're prepared and open to hear from and listen to other people, the better opportunity you have to tackle some of the challenges. And quite honestly, I went into geographies and what have you, regardless of the experiences that I had, which there would be appropriate moments to contribute that. But if I went in there just thinking that, oh, I've been appointed this because clearly I am worthy of it and know a whole lot, I would have missed out a tremendous amount of learning.
Yeah.
Without, having an open posture just to ask questions and learn from folk. And so I guess, that is, if I might say, is essential to a curious mindset. How can you be curious and closed? It just doesn't work.
Have you ever watched the film called Echo in the Canyon?
No, I haven't. What's it all about?
I would recommend you watch it because I think you'd enjoy it. It's actually
Okay.
the story of Laurel Canyon, which is where many, many famous West Coast bands in America emerged. I mean, and it was famous bands like John Mayall, obviously in the Blues Breakers, the Beach Boys, and Jackson Brown, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young,
Okay.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, the Mamas and Papas. And they all lived in this little place on the West Coast called Laurel Canyon, and it's Echo in the Canyon. And in fact, it's Bob Dylan's son is the sort of narrator that takes you through this journey, and it's quite remarkable when you hear. You find out things that I never knew, which was just how significant the Beach Boys were as an influence for the Beatles, and vice versa. And so, yeah, it's a cool movie. If you get a chance, download it and watch it. It's a whole lot of fun.
I'm curious already. I'll look it up.
Yeah, good. Okay, cool.
Good.
But jumping back into this whole wonderful work of coaching and of leadership and of making the world a better place. I think we've gotten to the place where business recognizes how imperative it is to have that facility for its leaders. If you think about it, professional sports people, whether individuals or teams and Olympians and the likes, none of them operate without at least one, if not a bunch of professional coaches.
That is
and
true.
you know what? Whilst the world's fiercely competitive, it's not complex like the world of work. Mm-hmm. And business leaders have got many more variables and dependencies and uncertainties that they have to manage. And why would it not then be appropriate for them to have a coach who helps guide them and take them through, and or mentors that do that as well?
Yeah.
What's peak performance, do you think, Bryan? What's the peak performance of, say, mentors and coaches, and what are they looking to get out of the people they're coaching?
Well, I think that's a good question, John, because I would reframe it to say, what are they wanting to put into the people they're coaching? That the people will discover. And importantly, it's not about them. It's not about the coach. It's not about the mentor. They've got to have a heart to serve. They've got to have a servant leadership type mindset. Otherwise, the tendency is that they're gonna want to impose their view, their perspective. They want to be the hero. They want to be right. They want to, show the way. When in fact, it's like the Sherpas that on climbing Mount Everest. They're doing the climbing and they're up there with you and they also summit. But it's not about them. It's about getting the mountaineers to the top of the hill.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I worked for two very progressive organizations, and the first time I was introduced to coaching was about 2000, Bryan, in the year 2000.
Yeah.
And I remember going into this office to meet my coach every month, and just on that song about running on empty, we were being pushed incredibly hard in these corporates, and in this one in particular, Anglo-American. And I remember going into the office every month, and my coach would ask me, how's the month gone? What's going on? What's on your mind? And I would start to, say a few things. And all the coach kept doing for me was reflecting back to me what I said was going on. And in some cases, the coach would say, well, remember the last time, Leslie, we were here, you committed to, and you said this was important. but you've just said the following to me. So what does that mean for you? And what it is, Jono, is I think the more you have people working alongside you who help you see yourself and your potential, the more you get into, I can see how I can live into that potential. And it becomes much more of a conscious choice. Half the time we're running blind. We're running blind because we don't have mentors who can give us the opportunity to see the world in a bigger way than we currently can, because we're running hard and it feels hard, or a coach who allows you to see yourself and say, oh, hold on, I best stop that because this keeps happening all the time. And so the best mentors and coaches for me have allowed me to expand myself into myself, so to speak. And I don't think I would have had as much of an opportunity to do that but for those people. So yeah, they do that. They help you bring out your best self.
How much of that do you feel is sort of short-term maintenance, versus a long-term change, a long-term outlook?
Oh, that's very good. I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. Sometimes in the moment, it feels like it's short-term maintenance. But when you step back and you see what all those sort of injections have been over time, you realize, oh goodness, they've helped build you on a different trajectory over the long term. But when you go in there in that moment, it just feels like, oh, I've been helped today, and I've been helped today. But I guess again, it's probably like Brian's analogy of these sporting coaches. You walk away today feeling like my shot's a little better today, and a whole series of my shots a little better today makes you a world tennis player, in 4 or 5 years. Without you, it just creeps up on you beautifully, I guess.
Yeah.
What as you're talking, what I'm thinking of is, and I'd welcome your input, Leslie.
Yeah.
When I think of the comparison between a mentor and a coach, and once again, let's distinguish between what one might call performance or developmental coaches versus transformational coaches. Because I think that performance and developmental coaches could actually reside in-house in an organization, because it speaks to the performance things. Whereas the transformational coach, I doubt could really reside inside of the company, because you're getting into spaces that are deeply private and there'd be blurry lines and conflicts of interest in that space. And when we look at it in the transformational coaching space, so whilst we're doing this with very specific intent for impactful change in the business role and in their business capacities and professional capacities with measurable, well-formed outcomes and all that sort of good stuff, it's about the whole person. It's about the entire person. And it's about deeply reflective, introspective shift and creating greater levels of self-awareness and all those sort of things that are there, that are deeply private and confidential. I wonder, in the case of mentoring, if the primary focus isn't much more around the business person and their role as a business person and their performance in that space, versus blurring into the space of the let's call it the person, the human being. I don't know.
Predominantly, I guess it is about the business person, but I think it takes, and again, I think this was the conversation we're having before we started, if not bled in when we did start, is this whole idea of certification and standards. I think people feel a lot safer to bring in personal dimensions into a coaching conversation, because of the assurances of ethics and all of that.
Yeah.
With mentorship, I think you've got to get to a point of deep trust before people start telling you all of the other things that are going on in their lives, which impact business performance, but are about the whole. I was very fortunate with one of my mentors that we built trust pretty quickly. And I can tell you that the first early sessions were very little to do with actually business. It was just, I'm in this new place. It's a new geography. You're well established here. I don't want to feel like it's going to take a long time for me to integrate into society. And that was when we moved across from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And, some people say, Cape Town's pretty difficult, it's cliquey and all of that. But I didn't want to fall into that trap. And so a lot of my conversations with the mentor was, I don't want to prejudge people around here and just live into the stereotype. How can I integrate into society, me, my family, and what have you? And so a lot of that mentorship was about that, which had an impact in my work, because if me and my family didn't feel settled, and in this case, I was working in Stellenbosch and all of that, if we didn't feel settled and welcome and integrated in there, we probably would have, after a couple of years, if not even, I might have said, well, this feels too difficult, we've got to go. And so the mentor bridged that bit, which was personal stuff, but had a business impact.
That's so rich, so interesting. And yeah, I think that it's so funny you talk about that, because as you know, I lived in Johannesburg most of my life, and then in recent years migrated to our home in the Cape. We've had a home in the Cape for 25 years, but only recently have come to live down here. And, with hearing all the things of, oh gosh, Cape Town's so cliquey and Cape Town's this, I had absolutely no problem making connections, getting immersed in it, becoming part of the play and getting into the hearts of the people in Cape Town. And yes, they have a very different lifestyle to Johannesburg. Joburg's only got its social structure to depend on. Cape Town's got the mountains and the wine farms and the restaurants and the beaches and all that stuff.
Sure.
So, there are lots of excuses for why some things work and others don't. But we've had no problem. We've had no problem with that, and love it so much. It's wonderful.
Yes.
It's wonderful being here. And Leslie, talking about the work you're doing right now and some of the types of organizations that you engage with, has that varied quite considerably in recent years?
Oh, yes, it has. So a big chunk of my work now is on the other side of the boardroom table. So, I was the exec for a long time, fronting up to boards, reporting to the boards. But now it's been very interesting. For most of my work, I sit on the other side as a non-exec. And that also is change for you. It's been change for me, as in, it doesn't matter how I would do it. What's really important is that it gets done. And I need to recognize that people will do things in different ways. And as long as they're not breaching our fiduciary responsibilities and what have you, I need to be okay that people are doing things in different ways. I have no line management authority to, even if I was uncomfortable about that, to assert myself. As long as we're legally true, we're within governance, our job is to work with the executives and give them the space to deliver. So that's been an interesting transition for me. And on the boards that I sit with some people who straddle both lives, and sometimes you can see them struggling with that because they still have that executive impetus, whereas I'm losing a lot of that executive impetus in these roles. They're also very different, Bryan, in that quite a number of the boards that I sit on are non-profits.
Yes.
And so, what I have appreciated is, firstly, they are professionally run. So some of these companies would give a lot of the private companies a run for their money in the excellence of which they do their work. But they struggle. A lot of how they get their money is through philanthropy. And so they've got to state their case. And there's not a lot of money to go around. And so, on the one hand, it's marketing, but it's marketing of a different nature. But what is interesting and what I really enjoy is purpose is big in these organizations.
Yeah.
The reason why they exist and why they do it is huge. It's not driven by money, obviously. And it's wonderful to see people who are doing really big, meaningful things in the world because they care about things very deeply. And these organizations are largely focused in the United Kingdom. And this is where I spend most of my time. So it's helped a lot for me to be aware of some of the things that are going on in the UK. A lot of which is to deal with social challenges, to help communities become resilient, to help communities embrace diversity with its changing landscape. And so it's been very interesting for me to see some of that at the coalface and to see organizations help them with those changes and those difficulties.
So when we step back and look at the world that we're in right now,
Yeah.
So first let's acknowledge that to a large extent, the political leaders of our time are still enormously command and control type people.
Yeah.
And that's just the way they are, and whether it works or doesn't work for them, let's leave that debate for another day. But when we look at the world as it is, we've gone from being a complicated world in the 20th century to being a complex world in the 21st century, and a systemic world where the old way of planning and modeling and casting strategy, because you do so much with strategy, in stone, and that's what we're going to work towards, and that's the 3, 5, 10-year plan, doesn't work anymore. And it requires a very different type of leader, and it requires having all the voices in the room and a systemic approach to it. And very importantly, a much more self-aware leader to be able to really understand, firstly, how to manage self, and then before managing, others and organizations. And your observation in some of the companies and the places you're working into, have they started migrating in that way to have a transformational, inclusive type of leadership style and bring all the voices into the room?
Oh, yes. And I think particularly in the non-profit space, in the non-profit space, a lot of the leaders that work on these boards and what have you in the non-profit space is voluntary. So the only way you keep people engaged is if they feel that, they can make a contribution, that they are being listened to. Otherwise, they just will easily leave and go and volunteer their time somewhere else. And so there's a lot more of that, Bryan, I find in the non-profit space here than you would probably find in commercial companies. But having said that, good commercial companies, of which I worked for 2, know how to work with people because they know that that's the power. Why employ people if you're going to only, want to use half of what they've got because you're shutting down the other half because of your culture and your leadership style? That's not necessary. To your point about the world is a lot more complex now, I don't think leaders now and going forward have a choice but to really hone their ability to work well with other people.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a choice anymore. When we started this HR stuff, people, and even coaching when we started 2003, I think early 2003, 2004 in BAT in South Africa. Some people thought, what's this airy, fairy, fluffy stuff?
Yeah.
This soft, they call them soft skills. These are the hardest skills. Working with people who don't come in a consistent way every day, because we're all subjected to mood changes, things that are happening in our lives, requires a real awareness, not only, as you said, of yourself and the impact you have on others, but on what's really going on with other people, and a curiosity and a respect for other people. Now, the factory is not the same as it was, yesteryear. Before, it was one line, and the factory manager or the operations manager knew everything about that line. Have a look at the production floors these days.
Yeah.
Okay? They are incredibly complex. And so the guy or girl at the top there, if they think that they know how to run every aspect of that factory and can tell people what to do every single day, they're hardly going to be the most competitive, to be honest. So, we have to learn how to work well with people. And that's about giving them space, allowing for diverse views. But also diverse views cause you to need to be uncomfortable with things that you didn't imagine, and sit long enough with people's different ideas to want to see where's the value in what somebody else is saying. just because it's not how I see things, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It may well be right, and it may well be better than anything you could have imagined. Sit with it, be open, and pull out the value that somebody's offering you.
Liz, you're so right, and I think that it comes back to one of my favorite subjects, which is around the issue of purpose and the issue of intentionality. And why are we here? Why are we doing this? What is this desired customer, whoever that customer looks like, whether it's a business customer or whether it's just the world that we're operating in, or whether it's society or whatever, what is the desired experience for them? Because they own the brand. How they experience us lives in their hearts and minds, and that's what we are. Mm-hmm. And how do we then model our behaviors, our values, everything around what's coming from the heart? So it's so important that it's not coming from the head. There's a space for creativity and innovation and all of that stuff, but it's got to come from the heart, because that sets the tone for the trust that needs to be built, for the interactions, for the connections that have got to prevail in order for the world to be successful.
Yeah. And I think the consumer is much more attuned to brands that genuinely are interested in them and connect with them at that level of purpose. I think when it comes from the heart, it's a lot more for the brand to express it and an authenticity that consumers can connect with. And I think consumers are not only wanting to be seen and heard and respected, they don't want to be taken for granted either. And so, people's work, whatever the brand is, believe in what you're doing, because if you don't, the customer or the consumer is going to smoke you out pretty quickly. And, all these discussions about ESG and what have you, unless you sincerely mean it, they will know whether you mean it or not. They will
absolutely
quickly pick that up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And can you believe it? We have come to the end of our show. An hour is gone, and it's been such a delight, and we've only started scratching the surface. So I'm definitely getting you back on, because there's so much more to talk about.
I'd love to keep chatting.
But in the meantime, just to wish you just such great success in what you're doing and where you're going. Send love and best wishes to Dudu and to your boys, and take care of yourself. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome, Bryan, and love to Z as well. And John, great meeting you here.
Yes, very nice to have met you as well.
Of course, reminding you listeners that if you're not with the ones you love the ones you're with, and take time to show the ones you love just how much you do. Take care.
Super.
All the best.
Thank you. Take care.